The Bubble Boy is a perfect example of everything that you shouldn't be doing, and yet, first of all, where are we? A Bubble Boy? We're doing an episode about a Bubble Boy. Guys, you know, we used to be about little tiny things. Bubble Boy. So first of all, the whole concept of the episode seemed wrong to me. Then, what do they cast? They cast our writer, John Heyman, who's a 50-year-old guy who sounds like, you know, he sounds like this, and he sounds like a 50-year-old guy, and we're playing Trivial Pursuit, and I just want... This isn't, it's not our show, it's not our show.
I remember a Bubble Boy getting some press at the time, or reading an article about a Bubble Boy, and just even saying the words out loud kind of amused me to some degree, and as horrible as that is.
I loved the Bubble Boy episode. It was one of my favorites. One of my favorite chunks of dialogue is this who's on first sort of dialogue that happens at the beginning of the Bubble Boy.
He's a Bubble Boy.
A Bubble Boy?
Yes, a Bubble Boy.
What's a Bubble Boy?
He lives in a bubble.
Boy.
We did an episode about the Bubble Boy, and the Bubble Boy wasn't treated too well in the episode. So we got a negative response from all the Bubble Boys and their family and friends.
Really wasn't about making fun of anyone. It didn't, see, that was the thing that we would kind of try to do was, the point of the thing was not that this poor kid, in fact, we made him a guy who you wouldn't have sympathy for, and also we didn't see him in the bubble, which would have been sad. And I remember Larry being very careful about that, which hadn't even occurred to me.
Once you see the Bubble Boy, it's no longer funny. So you had to keep the Bubble Boy off camera and just hear him. And John Heyman, who was a comedian who was working on the show that year, who was a very sarcastic fellow. And I say that in the best sense of the word. He was the natural choice for the Bubble Boy's voice.
Hi.
Hello.
Who are you? Where's Seinfeld?
He's on his way. These are his friends.
What are you looking at? Never seen a kid in a bubble before?
In your mind, when someone says it's a Bubble Boy, you think about, you know, John Travolta being helpless and soft and sweet, and, you know. John Heyman is none of those things. He's got this gravelly, foul voice, and it was such a surprise to have your expectations dashed by this Bubble Boy. And he'd put on the gloves and he'd, like, wrestle around. It was very funny talking to him as the Bubble Boy, because he's no boy.
What's your story?
I have no story.
She works for NBC.
How about taking your top off?
We had these comedians working for us that year, helping us write, and one of them was Bill Masters. And Bill Masters had a story that he was pitching to us that was not, he didn't realize that he had stumbled onto something brilliant. And he was pitching us the story, and in the middle of that story, he said, and we were playing Trivial Pursuits, and the card was misprinted and it said moops. And then he continued telling the story and went, whoa, 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 stop right there. That's a great story.
So that really struck me as being very funny and a great fodder for an argument with the Bubble Boy.
Who invaded Spain in the 8th century?
That's a joke. The Moors.
Oh, no. I'm so sorry, it's the moops. The correct answer is the moops.
Moops. Let me see that. That's not moops, you jerk. It's Moors. It's a misprint.
I'm sorry, the card says moops. It was another example of just pushing and banging away at that envelope of what's acceptable and how far you could stretch this show and this format and where you could take these characters. And another great example, and there are many, of me wrong, them right. It was an amazing episode.
Susan's parents on Seinfeld were such an odd and cold couple. You could kind of understand where Susan came from. Because a lot of people ask me, well, why would Susan be with George? And most of the time I have absolutely no answer for them. But you know, when you put them in context to her family, then maybe it makes a little sense. It's a, you know, it's a nice little hub of dysfunction, so there's always room for another spoke.
From John Cheever.
Wow.
Dear Henry, last night with you was bliss. I fear my orgasm has left me a cripple. I don't know how I shall ever get back to work. I love you madly, John. P.S. Loves the cabin.
Give me that! Who told you to open it?
Who's John? Who's John?
John Cheever dead. You and John Cheever? Yes. Yes, he was the most wonderful person I've ever known. And I loved him deeply. In a way you could never understand.
That's the joy of dysfunctional families, really. Dysfunctional families thrive on ignoring what's wrong. So, you know, you can have a homosexual relationship with John Cheever and cuddle up to your wife in a horse-drawn carriage a couple of years later and not really think about what's really going on in life.
Can't believe you said that.
What?
How could you say something like that to me?
What? You were the one who was talking dirty. I was just trying to keep up.
That was a weird thing to say.
Why? It didn't mean anything. I was just trying to join in so you wouldn't feel embarrassed.
Oh, I think you're really sick.
I'm not sick. You said much sicker things than me.
I'm embarrassed to say that the panty remark is actually something that happened to me, and I told it to Larry, thinking he'd never let that go in. He says, "Yeah, that's great," and it was a true story about years ago, before I met my sainted wife, way before that, dating a girl, and she wanted me to be a little naughty verbally to her, and I just went past the mark. I went too far, and I could say all of a sudden, she focused, looked at me like I was, you know, John Wayne Gacy, but I even then thought this is so funny, you know, just. Well, you said talk. I didn't, you know. Okay, I got excited, you know.
So she's talking about her panties. So I said, "You mean the panties your mother laid out for you?"
The panties your mother laid out for you? What does that mean?
I don't know.
I remember that the last scene in the Cheever letter is when I get to reveal the fact that I have known what Jerry said throughout the whole time, but no one's known that I've known. It was like being a magician with a huge monster toucan stuck up my sleeve. That's what it felt like.
All right, look, we got to get back to work. We just had a big breakthrough here.
Okay, I'll leave you two alone.
Okay.
Maybe I'll go visit my mother. She just bought me some new panties, and they're all laid out for me.
We shot that scene about, I don't know, 3 or 4 times, but every time I got to deliver that line and then shut the door as a beautiful sort of punctuation, the audience flipped out. I will never forget that moment. It was so exciting, and then to close the door and just go like this behind the door and everyone's screaming. It was such fun. It was such a fun secret to keep. That was a great blow. That's a great example of no one ever being ahead of the story. No one was ever ahead of our stories. At least I wasn't.
The opera episode, again, I like the idea of Pagliacci, the clown. We had this Joe Davola character, and I started to kind of like formulate. Again, I would just take elements that I found interesting and try to juxtapose them and see what would happen, you know. And I love the idea of the clown motif. I love the idea of Joe Davola becoming obsessed with Elaine, and the thing that really kind of got me excited was the idea of trying to parallel the opera and the episode.
I did know that Larry named a lot of characters after people he knew, Lloyd Braun, Gavin Polone, the list goes on. However, I didn't know there was a crazy Joe Davola, and Jerry and I were at some NatP convention, and some guy comes up to me and goes, "Hey, Julia, I'm Joe Davola." And I had a little sort of heart-stopping moment thinking, ooh, this is getting strange. Because crazy Joe Davola was sort of a weirdo, stalker, crazy guy. What is all this?
Do you like it? My home is a shrine to you.
Where did you get all these pictures?
I took them myself with a telephoto lens. I developed them myself in my darkroom. Would you like to see?
In the dark room? Oh, no thank you. Not right now. I'm a day person.
And I remember going up to Jerry and saying, there's a guy here, he says his name is Joe Davola. And Jerry says, yeah, there's a real guy named Joe Davola. And then subsequently I got some sort of, and he must have registered that I was a little bit flipped, that he had approached me and said that was his name. And so then when we got back to LA from this convention, I got some sort of basket of muffins or flowers or something saying, you know, love the real Joe Davola. I have to tell you, I was still a little flipped.
There was an ongoing disposition of Kramer's where he was terrified of clowns. And I personally am not afraid of clowns, but it's just very funny, isn't it? That somebody could be afraid of clowns.
You ever been to the circus? Oh, when I was a kid. Did you like it?
Well, you know, it was fun. I was kind of scared of the clowns.
In an age of analysis where everyone seems to be probing the reason why they are the way they are, it's surprising to me that people never wanted to know why Kramer's afraid of clowns. Because there's a lot of pathology in that.
Are you still scared of clowns?
Yeah.
Boris Karloff stated that the most terrifying image is a clown in the night. And when you think of that one, if you're driving along and you see a clown standing by the side of the road and your headlights come across that figure, that's spooky. Just thought I'd throw that in.